Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Accelerating Operational Readiness in Biotech, Bridging the Chasm from Project Mode to Operations. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speaker. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speaker throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank CAI, who developed the content for this presentation. Since CAI was founded in 1996, they have delivered over $500 million in services for hundreds of clients across thousands of projects around the world. With offices in the US, Canada, Australia, Netherlands, Korea, Switzerland, Ireland, Italy, China, India, Singapore, and Malaysia, they have built an international team of over 750 professionals, providing local support from a global company. CAI's engineering, technical, and consulting services are fashioned purposefully to develop mission-critical facilities at a high level of performance and reliability. When operational readiness and startups are critical, CAI helps deliver to a higher standard. I'd now like to introduce our speaker for today's event. Serving as the Global Director of Human Performance Services at CAI, Harry Benson leads a team of experienced professionals in developing and executing programs, processes, and tools with clients to standardize and improve the performance of their people. A former nuclear-trained submarine officer, he is an expert in organizational culture and structure, along with learning solutions design and delivery, with over 25 years of experience in applying current methods for organizational effectiveness within highly technical environments. His methods have driven measurable improvements over a wide range of companies. And so without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to our speaker today, Harry Benson. You may begin when you're ready.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everybody. I do appreciate everyone's attention. I think this is quite a relevant topic. It's one that's getting a lot of attention from certainly our clients and in the industry for a lot of reasons, and happy to discuss that further if anyone has any questions on why that is. The topic is, as Ryan said, accelerating your operational readiness. In other words, how to cross that bridge from project to run mode. So let's look at what the real objective is. The objective of any site, any asset, whether it's a new line within your existing plant, it's a new plant, maybe it's a tech transfer of a new product into your site or to another contracted site. All of that, the real objective is actually not to complete the capital project. I know it sounds like a shocker when you're in the midst of it. It seems like that's your objective. That's a milestone, right? That is not the real objective. The real objective, of course, is to run, and to run at the targeted levels of production, release, and cost in a sustainable, consistent way. Yet we find time and time again that is not achieved. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the problem statement itself and why that might not be achieved, and what you can do about it, what you should do about it, including the investment and why you would invest that, and then get right into the actions that would take place to do it properly. So we're going to start right in with a polling question. Ryan, you want to bring this one up?
Yes, thank you very much. We have a poll question that's appearing on everyone's screen right now, and you can interact with it in real time by selecting on any of the answers that you see in front of you and then clicking submit to participate. The question that we're asking asks, which of these most closely aligns with your site's leadership definition of operational readiness? Your answer options are successful facility and utility qualification and PPQ, attain agency approval, produce X amount within Y timeframe, release X amount within Y timeframe, or achieve a cost per unit of less than the X amount by a target date. We'll give everyone a few seconds to consider their answer and participate. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to consider this. The question is, which of these most closely aligns with your site leadership's definition of operational readiness? It looks like most of you have submitted a vote, so thank you very much for participating. Let's take a look at where the answers have come in. We do have Oh, sorry, here we are. Let's take a look at our results. We have 39% at successful facility, 30% for attain approval, 13% both for producing the X amount within Y time frame and the Y releasing the X amount in Y time frame, and then 4% for achieving the cost per unit. Thank you very much for participating. Harry, this is back to you.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that is interesting, and not terribly surprising because most of us, if you're involved with capital project, you're involved with construction, design, construction, testing phases, et cetera, validation, we tend to think in terms of making that capital project a success. But it's only a success if we can hand the keys to those who are going to operate it, whether it's us or another group, in an integrated way, in a seamless way, so they hit the goals. I might argue that an ideal definition, if we really want to look at the real purpose of the asset, of the site or line, it would be some combination of D and E, right? Because C is assumed if you get D right. Let's go into that just a little bit further. So if we think about the definition of operational readiness, let's look at the, and place this graph, overlay this graph on top of oops, there we are. There's my cursor on top of a timeline, right, for an asset, right? So if this is your site or line's timeline or life cycle, right here is your qualification turnover, so your startups, if you will, and then you run to operations, right? Well, if operational readiness was successful, you'll have this blue curve very vertical, or at least, I should say, along the designed startup time, the amount of startup time you had intended, right? Fairly vertical. You might hear the term vertical startup often. And then you achieve this point, meaning you hit your stride upon startup in a sustained, consistent manner, so that you're operating and releasing product. Notice the y-axis is released product, not just produced, right? And you're hitting your scoreboard metric, which may or may not be market demand, but at least you're choosing, you've designed this thing to produce and release X amount of product per time frame, per batch, what have you, vials, however you want to look at it. And instead, we often get the orange curve. So if this is the definition of operational readiness, and this is what we're often getting, let's figure out why that is. Well, if we separate the two, this left curve is what I just described, and you're hitting your stride sustainably and consistently, being able to produce your targeted volumes and release your targeted volumes. Here, we see the startup was delayed, maybe more runs just to address issues, and then you have a lot of jumps back and up and down, maybe occasionally hitting your targeted release rate. So why is that? Well, you look at these bar graphs, these orange bar graphs are issues. They represent issues. And our challenge in operational readiness, and getting ahead of it, is to identify these issues that are likely to occur well before startup in terms of risks. Just like we do in a quality by design, quality risk management, we want to recognize what those issues are going to be while we're in the construction, tech transfer, whatever phases, well prior to startup, and run them to ground in the terms of risks, so that we avoid the issues that plague our production and release. In order to do that, we need two things. We need a number of things, don't get me wrong, but we need to be able to identify those issues and as risks and run them to ground, which means we need experienced people. And it's a little crazy to think that as a site head or a director or a department head or other leader, that we would be able to manage that all ourselves, right? We need people who have experienced that and have experienced it within the work streams that occur or that are necessary for your business. Right? So you're not going to have the bandwidth. Even if you have the experience yourself, you're not likely to have the bandwidth to be able to run all those to ground, and you probably don't have the expertise in all of these areas. So we recommend breaking out your risks into, or your potential issues into work streams. Now, these align very closely with traditional departments. I recognize that, and this may sound very simple, but let's not forget that it's not as easy as it looks, and it requires focus. You have to make decisions on how you invest in people and expertise and focused action. So with that, let's figure out whether it's worth making that focused investment with another poll question. Ryan?
Thank you. Indeed, we've got our second poll question up on screen, this time asking, what is your estimated cost of a 2-month delay in production and or release of a batch in US dollars? Again, you can participate by selecting on any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking submit. The question that we have for you this time, as I already read, the answer options this time are less than 20,000, 20,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 500,000, 500,000 to $1 million, or over 1 million. Again, the question is, what is your estimated cost of a 2-month delay in production and or release of a batch in US dollars? We have most of our answers in, so thank you very much. Let's look at the results this time around. Oh, interesting spread, 29% at 20K to 100. Yes, sorry, go ahead, Harry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. It is interesting. Pretty well distributed, and none of the low numbers, which I expected it to be low. So wow, this is good. So if that's the case, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. Sorry to talk over you there.
That's all right. Go ahead.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for responding to the poll. And if that's the case, I think we can do some quick math and say, look, rather than assume that we can all scramble with our limited bandwidth to run all those issues to ground as risks, maybe it's worth investing based on the cost of those batches, either gained or lost, in an operational readiness strategy. Right? Now, one way to look at this is a very simple, grade school math problem, right? So if our investment cost is X and we divide it by Y, which is the value per batch, we end up getting the number of batches, gained batches to break even, right? So using that model, which is very simplistic, you can also do it in terms of payback by time or something if you'd rather. But let's look at some examples. So let's say, for instance, bringing on an expert and a half or whatever in certain work streams of high risk, costs you 200K, right? And where they're focused on readiness of those work streams, and your batches are worth 400K. Well, it only takes half a batch of extra gain before you've paid for that investment, right? So just doing the micro math, you can tell that it's probably worth it. The question is, I understand the whole budgeting process too. There's a difference between, ROI costs arguments and budgets, right? Maybe you don't have that budget. First of all, if you're still in the budgeting process, I recommend you budget and allocate a budget using some of the material that we talk about here, hopefully is for your consideration, and budget out an operational readiness strategy and plan, right? And budget for those experts that I'll be talking more about as to what they're going to be doing. If you've already got the budget fixed and you don't have that flexibility, then you just need to prioritize and look at where your highest risks are to hitting this orange curve instead of hitting what you desire, which is this blue curve, and make investments accordingly, right? And make that business case. It's just some things to think about. But in addition, remember we talked about it's not just the release of another batch or two, right? The release of another couple batches is great, right? And timely release, all that good stuff. But what has to really happen is you have to be able to do it consistently and sustainably. Now, there's some other costs of not being ready. Even if you manage to get a few batches out, post startup, the problem is what I've seen in my experience, and we have seen at CAI, is a lot of Herculean efforts, right? Heroic efforts to get every batch out. That's unsustainable. And you find yourself in a cost situation that are well above target, right? Sometimes 2 to 4 times. I've been at sites that are literally 4x of their target of cost per batch. And that is unsustainable in a business, in a financial model. Right? And why is that? Well, a lot of quick fixes, a lot of scrambling, a lot of overtime, sole sourcing or express shipping of materials, and urgent fixes of problems and equipment, that could have been addressed had you had a more thorough pre-startup risk mitigation plan, right, with the right level of expertise. What's more is those heroic efforts, we all know, I'm sure everyone on this call knows, that it leads to deviations, which have explicit costs somewhere in this range, but have implicit costs that go much higher, and turnover, right, burnout, people unclear of their roles, competing priorities. And if they can't see a light at the end of the tunnel that this is ever going to change, you're going to lose them. So those costs are just as painful as not hitting your batch release timing. So what do we got to do? What are these expert folks that you're bringing on, or what does your site need to do? You need to control the variability, right? Just like you have any risk mitigation strategy, your quality system controls also control variability of your product, right? Also variability in your production and release process. And the operational excellence models that have been built for decades typically point to something called the 3 Ps, if you've heard that term: people, procedures, and plant, right? And it's a little gimmicky, but it is memorable because it helps you understand the things that cause variation in your production and release processes. So if we look at it from that point of view, what we need is to have those people with the expertise to recognize what those issues are going to be on these 3 Ps and how we can put controls in place to control the variability of those 3. And I'm going to talk about each of them next. And it starts with a roadmap. Now, this is a very simple roadmap. You might say too simple. Wow, is it really that easy? But we're going to use this roadmap as our tool to take us on that journey of operational readiness. I'll go over all of these cells in just a little bit, but let's start with this one. Number 1, whether you use this roadmap or not, you absolutely, at the top leadership level, the site leadership has to set site objectives, right? So let's talk about that. Are your people behaving as owners, meaning they are owning their unit operations, they're owning their space, they're owning their process and systems? Or are they treated and acting as staff, right? I've certainly been there. I've been that third guy back in the middle before. It's not fun, and it's just you're punching the clock, you're burning out, you don't even know why you work there, et cetera, et cetera. This is avoidable. This is avoidable, right? And it starts with the site leadership setting clear expectations. And when I say expectations, I don't mean like, here's a list of tasks that you need to do. I'm talking, where are we all rowing toward, right? What's the scoreboard metric? And everybody should know it. It should be well communicated. We are out to achieve this volume by this date or whatever, right? X number of days to release, X number of batches or vials or whatever per month, something that we can all row toward and celebrate when we hit. And what you're going to find is ownership when we don't hit it or where we can improve, and they'll own their unit operations, they'll own their space and be a part of it. And those who are less experienced, they're not system owners, let's say, maybe they're not experts yet, that's okay. You got a lot of staff like that. They aspire by those other people because they're rowing as well, and they're well aware of the expectations and the goals, and they aspire to be one of those system owner types, expert types, and they have career progression within your facility. That's a better place to be, and that requires site leadership to set the goals and then set metrics. How are we going to measure this? The lag metrics are some of those scoreboard metrics I talk about. Lead metrics are things that indicate whether we're going to hit that scoreboard metric, right? And here's some metrics to consider. I'm not going to go over all these. Just know that there's operational ones and there's ones related to the talent and the people, right? The operational ones are related to the site, the equipment, the productivity, the quality, et cetera. And even the one the FDA likes to look at is, are people following procedures, right? That's kind of a crossover between operations and talent. And then on the talent side, turnover, what's your pipeline look like to bringing on people quickly, qualifying them quickly, et cetera. And then the workplace effectiveness. That is measurable, by the way. And if I'm not going to cover the metric of workplace effectiveness in this session, but it is one that we will cover in future sessions, and I'm happy to discuss offline if anyone has any questions about how to do that. Keeping in mind, as with all metrics, you don't just put them in place and then look at them a year later or a month later. What you do is you use them, you establish a baseline as well as a goal, you communicate the target to everybody, and then you trend it over time and look for continuous improvement. Moving on back to operational readiness, though, the next step is, where do your department leads, where do your department heads, your work stream leads focus their efforts, right? Because again, as I said, a few smart people, smart experienced people is probably not enough, right? You might think it is, but the bandwidth is going to break down really quickly and everybody's going to be wearing too many hats and it's not going to work. So what these department heads need to do is, first of all, map the process at a high level, right? And I'm sure most of you have done that in some way or another, but if you haven't, we'll touch on that real briefly. And then what you're going to do as department leads is you're going to focus on where you need expertise to support your bandwidth and your expertise gaps. And then you'll define your system owners. After that, we'll do the rest of the roadmap. So let's dive into what those actions are all about. First, very simply, draw out a process map. High levels, fine. Right? Doesn't need to be in the weeds with all the tasks that have to be performed, all the procedures yet. We're not there yet, right? Start with this block diagram. This block diagram will serve you in so many ways. And at CAI, we find it, actually, I find it very invigorating and fun to run process mapping workshops. It engages the people that are responsible. And I would do, at this level, at the department level, I would do cross-department, interdepartment workshops with all the department leads or the designated people to map out the processes as they interrelate. And what do I mean by that? Well, as we all know, this is a snapshot of upstream manufacturing. Okay, great. So it's not just the head of manufacturing or the upstream lead or whatever that should be mapping this process. Doing a workshop with that person and someone representing QC, that leading QC group and leading the QA group, leading the supply chain group, leading EHS for that matter, or engineering and sciences and tech transfer, right? All of those people have input to production, for example, and production has input to theirs. Those crossing points is where you need to align, right? And you build this table in a set of processes around every one of those areas. So you need a process map for warehouse operation. You need a process map for QC testing, right? All of those process maps being built, not in the weeds again, just high level process map. And we'll get to why that is in a minute. And then the department heads need to decide from this diagram, where do I need system owners? Where do I need experts to complement? And maybe I am an expert in some of these areas, but that's not enough because I'm going to be busy. My bandwidth is limited. I need somebody to own the processes, the systems, the unit operations of their expertise. So let me start with another poll, or go with another polling question. Ryan?
Thank you very much. Our next poll question is appearing on everyone's screens at this time. The question would like to know, how many system owners does your site currently have, whether formally designated or informally assigned? Your answer options are 0, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10, or over 10. Again, the question is, how many system owners does your site currently have, whether they've been formally designated or informally assigned? As with the previous questions, take a moment to consider your answer, select one of the answers in front of you, and then click Submit to participate.
It's interesting, by informally assigned, you've all been there where so-and-so is the go-to filling person. They, for the filling system, they're the ones everybody goes to, or the CMMS, everybody knows where to go for the maintenance systems, you always go to this person because they know everything about it. That's kind of your informally assigned system owner, if you will.
Well, we have most of our answers in. Let's take a look at our results. They should be up on the screen right now for you, Harry.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so a nice spread there. Some of you aren't using system owner concept, I understand, or maybe you're not sure. We've got a lot of folks in the middle. It's kind of an even distribution curve there. It's pretty interesting. So why system owners and what will they do? So let's get into that. First of all, I would challenge everyone on the call to think through where they really need expertise. Now, CAI has a model that you're looking at right here, and we have more detail behind every one of the blocks on this little periodic table we have here. You'll notice going across the top in dark blue are the work streams, as we call them, and then vertically down are the elements of those work streams. And you might argue that you need SMEs, maybe not systems owners. I mean, system owner is a pretty broad term, and it could be a process owner, it could be just an SME, particularly when you get into like regulatory or whatever. But maybe not all of these apply to your site, and that's fine, but they should all be considered as to whether or not you need expertise in this area. And does it need to be one-to-one, one person for every block? Probably not, and I'm not even suggesting that. But some of them, depending on the level of risk and criticality, do require that level of focus. So the challenge would be for you to take this diagram and say, could I name a person who is accountable to make sure we've got our act together in every one of these cells? Or, the ones that apply to your business, right? And if the answer is no, then you ought to think, okay, well, who should I put there? If the answer is yes, you need to ask yourself another question. Do those people that I have listed there as that person who knows our spare parts management plan, or who manages our EMP, who's responsible and accountable to the EMPQ, right? Does that person have the expertise, the authority, and the bandwidth, meaning focus, to actually own that space? And that's an organizational challenge, not a challenge on the individual. Thinking of that, let's think about those success factors. So in order to be successful as a system owner, you do need that expertise in that area, right? No question. At least some level of experience that's sufficient, right? And then resources where needed. Maybe there are outside resources they can turn to, that's fine. They need the focus, as I talked about. This can't be something, 2% of their time during, pre-startup. That's just not going to fly. They need the authority to move forward on the actions that we're going to talk about here a little bit. And they need organizational support in the form of, to be able to perform these tasks. And we're going to get into these tasks just a little bit. And that's the rest of the roadmap that I'm about to cover. So give me a second to read that. But again, I'm going to touch on all these and what that means. We've even gone so far for organizations that haven't adopted the system owner concept, but do want to consider it or go that route. Maybe they're bringing on some experts and they don't know, and they want to clarify their roles, which is very important, right? Clear role clarity is important to people's success and to their, career and retention. We've built a system owner qual card, right? And, time allowing, I can always go back to it and show it to you. But qualification cards kind of is in CAI's roots. That's we've done all our lives. It comes from our old Navy days, myself included. It's a good model to qualify people for their roles. And if you're designated a system owner and we just say, hey, get busy, here's a bunch of stuff to do, call me if you need me, that's not sufficient. Let's give them the tools to be a good system owner as well. So what are they going to be doing? The system owners are going to do all these things in the light blue. And I'm going to touch on these now, so you don't need to read them all here. First, remember the 3 Ps: people, procedures, and plant. The system owners are accountable to the readiness and the performance of their unit operations or their areas of expertise. And again, I'm using the system owner concept loosely here. It could be a process owner, could be an SME in a particular knowledge area or whatever of readiness, right? But the concept is still applies, right? Let's start with actually the plant side. Now, this is more the traditional system owner, but even this sometimes is lost on people, right? They aren't just the people that are go-to in case there's a problem to help validation, make sure their protocols are decent and all that stuff. It's not just that, right? They actually should be breaking down the unit operations into functional systems, components, however you want to look at it. Depends on what the area of expertise is. Identify potential failure points or risk points, right, in the system part of it, right, and then prioritize those based on criticality and risk, right, so that they know where to mitigate, where their mitigation strategies and actions need to take place. Now, step 4, of course, is more on the sustainability side. They also should be, once they're operating, they need to monitor operational performance with things like MTBF, mean time between failure, and other metrics. So what that means is they should be folded into your site's asset management system. Now, I'm not going to go into details of this, but suffice to say, if you have more questions about asset management systems and methods and building out your system or the actions that a system owner will take, we're happy to cover that in more detail. Steps 1 and 2 are not really for the system owner. Those are program-wide, right? But steps 3 through 6 would apply at the system level, right? At the unit operation level. And so those system owners would be responsible for or highly engaged in those activities. Now, if we look at the other side of it, the people and procedure stuff, here's what the system owners should do. Now, this often gets missed. And it's interesting that probably the best example that's most harmonized across our industry of where system owners are used in this way, where they do all 3 Ps, is probably in the utility space. We do see this quite a bit in the utility side. The people that own utilities typically are the folks that they know everything about the utilities. They manage to mitigate risks. They control its operations and its effectiveness, handle the procedures, the work instructions, et cetera, associated with them, and they train others to take the actions that need to be taken, other techs and so forth, to operate and maintain the system. So it's kind of curious why we don't apply that same rigor beyond facility and utilities department, especially in the clean spaces and the supply chain side, the QC side. It's the same principle, and we should have that same mentality. So on the people and procedures side, their job is to break down the processes into tasks. So remember that big process map we did? They are the ones that do what's called a work breakdown structure and figure out the tasking associated with it. And I'll show you why they do that in just a little bit. They map those tasks to procedures. That's SOPs, batch records, et cetera, work instructions, et cetera. And then map those tasks to roles. Who is going to perform those procedures, those tasks? And that matters, and I'll show you why in a minute. Then they're also responsible for building the structure of qualifying those people for their roles. Nobody knows better what it means to be an effective operator in this system, or an effective technician on this, or an effective warehouse tech in this area, or a QC lab analysts, or what have you, right? And now, step 5, very similar to the plant side, is more of your sustainable side. Once all that's done and you're in startup mode, or you're past the startup mode, you're in run mode, they should also be looking at how to identify and train more experts so that we have a sustainable program and not relying on a single point of failure from an expertise standpoint. So this is what I'm talking about, work breakdown structure, taking every step of the process and mapping out the tasks associated with it. Every one of those steps, whether it be upstream and downstream manufacturing like we're seeing here, or it's a QA process, change controls, et cetera, and all the tasks associated with it, right? They should map those tasks out. And who's going to perform those tasks is next. So what we're going to do is, by mapping out those tasks, here's the process, in this case, manufacturing line setup, right? Here are the tasks. What are the SOPs associated with that task? Have they already been identified, or do we need to write one? Or is the SOP sufficient? That system owner is accountable for making sure those match. And the batch record, likewise, when the time's right. The batch records should align to the procedures and the tasks. And then who is going to perform it? Does it require aseptic operator level 1 with less experience, less cost associated, et cetera? Is it more of an engineering role? Is it maybe a higher level operator for this particular task because it's a little more critical, a little more risk associated with getting it wrong? Maybe there's a QC step, there's a QA step, there's a supply chain step, engineering step, whatever. You have got to identify the humans who are going to perform these procedures, these tasks that dictate these tasks, and then and be responsible for the batch record execution. I love this table. This is the secret sauce. When you have this, you can then say, okay, now I can map out who is going to do what when. And this should look very familiar to you as a production schedule. This is the beginning of your production schedule. Now, this is one batch worth in this case, right, in this example. Right? So now, once I have this, now I can do the math and say, okay, if this is one batch, what is it going to take to hit my volume requirements of production and release? And keep in mind, there's a whole, release process that it can't be ignored. This is only a snapshot, right? All the steps of release as well have to be taken into account. And when all of that comes together, okay, how much can I produce with this one batch? And then how many runs of this do I need per week, per month, per year, whatever you want to call it, so that now I can outline how many shifts I need, what my operational strategy is, and ultimately build a staffing plan. Unless you've done that, you're only guessing at how many operators you need, how many techs you need, where you need expertise. You got to map it out. And yeah, it's some front end loading, and yeah, it's a little bit of investment of operational readiness amidst your busy construction and testing cycles, but it's worth it. We already showed the math. So now you notice from this staffing plan, and this is just an example, of course, but you've got your department heads early on, then you've got your SMEs, your system owners that you got to bring on, as well as maybe some of your senior operators, tiger team type techs and that kind of stuff, who are a little more experienced, and then eventually the rest of your staff. I do want to call attention to one critical role that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I do want to call it out, is the planner scheduler role. Should also be brought in early. And yes, you probably already have a planner scheduler for your construction project. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody, literally an operations planner scheduler. This is the same person, very likely, that might run your production schedule over time, right? Giving that dedication, a dedicated, focused role is probably worth it. It's probably worth the investment. I've seen many times where that's a fifth hat for somebody, a collateral duty of 10 to 20% of their job, and they're scrambling usually to make it work. Or they'll put it on a supervisor or something like that, which is pretty much the same thing. But doing it early, now this person can be the one that's your planner scheduler for your operational readiness plan, and you can actually workshop the operational readiness plan. I know I've talked about workshops a lot, but we like doing those because they're very efficient and they're very engaging. So having a system owner workshop is one of my favorite things to do. You bring all the system owners together, cross-functional, cross-department, because what we're going to do is we're going to help give them a jump start into their role. And all those assignments that I just went through, all those actions that they have to take, they start working on them together in a harmonized way, peers working together. And what you've got is the start of a peer group who will support each other throughout for a long time. Helps with effectiveness, helps with retention and engagement, and it gets you more ready for operations much quicker. Finally, the system owners have to train and qualify staff for the roles that they're being given, and that's across all the work streams, right? There's lots of ways to make someone bring someone to proficiency or competency to perform the tasks that they've been assigned, whether they're junior people, senior people, in between, doesn't matter, right? Unfortunately, this is often in our industry an afterthought, and I'm probably not telling any of you something you don't know. The exercise of scrambling to finish procedures at the 11th hour and then everybody read and understand them for training before they perform them is not sufficient. You are guaranteed to have delays, unreleasable product, deviations, burnout, etc. I strongly suggest you get ahead of the training side. And what's great about the model I showed you with the table, with the SOPs, is those same system owners can then translate those into meaningful training and qualification programs that take advantage of OJTs, performance-based assessments. Can I actually demonstrate that I can perform this task to my system owner or otherwise qualified SME or performer? Show them I can do this in a consistent manner, and that I have the knowledge associated with understanding that process well enough to know how to handle issues as they come up. Because it's not enough to, we don't want people that can follow procedure. Yeah, that's important. But they also have to be able to have enough knowledge to know what to do when something's a little bit out of whack, maybe an alarm condition or an out of spec condition or something that they didn't expect, right? So some knowledge background in training is useful. And let's take advantage of today's learning methods, right? It's not that hard and it's not that expensive. It just takes focused effort. And I'm not saying the system owner has to be an expert in e-learning creation or video creation, but if you have somebody that helps them, they are the content people. And we do this all the time. We're, others can do it as well. Help you build the learning in your training program, and your training people can help do this. Take that expertise and turn it into knowledge that's transferable to these new folks who are going to perform those tasks. What's more, training and qualification, particularly qualification, goes a step further, and that's the bottom arrow. Now, if I build a program that actually progresses my level of proficiency and my level of expertise over time, I now can see a career path for myself in this role. We're working with a site right now with a senior engineering director who I admire quite a bit. And he is this vision of exactly how to progress his engineers along their journey. And that's because he needs these engineers to stick around and know that they have a place here at this site for the long haul, because that's a competitive market, and keeping engineers in-house is hard because they can easily be bought away, so to speak, or they might burn out and see they have no path for advancement. So qualification programs also serve that purpose as well. So in the end, all of these actions that are taken by the site leadership, the department leaders, the system owners, and the staff all equate to this: operational readiness. You got your 3 P's of input: your people, your process, and your physical plant. And you control the variability of those 3 with the actions that I've described here, or your own versions of them. And you're going to get your targeted production release at sustainable, consistent costs. And with that, Ryan, I'd like to turn it back over to you and discuss any questions or discussion items.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that very insightful presentation. Before we move on to the Q&A session, I'd like to draw the audience's attention to the handouts module within the program, where they'll find some additional documentation related to today's presentation that they can download for some further reading later. I'd like to also invite the audience to continue sending their questions or comments right now using the questions window for this Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions though, so we'll get ourselves started there. Our very first question that we have for you would like to know, what do you recommend to do if you feel your leadership has not set a clear objective?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's the obvious. Talk to your leadership and say, hey, I recommend we set some goals, we set some targets, right? I don't know how approachable your leadership is, so obviously I can't speak in specifics, but I'm a fan of direct discussion in a respectful way, right? Of everybody, whether I'm talking to somebody that works for me or I work for, or one of my peers. A little challenge is not a bad thing. Hey, what would be great is my staff or my peers and I would love to be more engaged in the business, but we're struggling because it would help me to do my job if I knew exactly where we were rowing. And I'm thinking that everybody else feels the same way. Can you give me an idea of our targets? How many vials or batches or whatever are we trying to produce? Or are we setting up this new plant or this new line to produce? I think by having that, it'll give me more comfort in doing my job or whatever. I mean, I hope I answered the question. I mean, maybe give them a framework, give them some examples of where other sites have done it. And I kind of talked about that a little bit. That's what I recommend. It's a one-on-one discussion with your leadership. Just something
Excellent.
to think about.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The next question we have for you asks, well, earlier you had shown a slide showing cost ranges of things like deviations and turnover. The question is, where did those numbers come from?
Yeah, actually, I should probably go back to that slide. I don't know if there's an easy way to do that without making everybody dizzy, but let me try there. There we are. So these are, whoops, show my screen. I think I came off the screen there. Thank you, Ryan, for bringing it back to me. These are our experience and our data from real life scenarios and vetted against industry articles and research, right? So you'll notice the ranges are somewhat wide, particularly in turnover costs, and that's because it varies widely as far as tenure and that kind of thing. But these all come from real experience, real projects, and CAI certainly run hundreds of them, so we know we know what we're talking about. But obviously there's a wide enough variation because I do see variation in the market, particularly with deviations. Explicit costs, right? Direct costs of deviations are often measured in administrative ways, right? I have seen lower numbers like 10K, 15K per deviation, but realistically, you've got to consider more than just the administrative costs of a deviation. You got to think about the things that add to that cost. I did not account for instance, though, stalled batches, scrapped batches, obviously, or lines being down or anything like that, because that's obviously getting into the millions. So there's some indirect cost in there as well, such as opportunity costs of your engineers or your staff, your operators, whatever, doing investigations and so forth. It is costly for each deviation. As far as the cost per unit, or cost of goods sold is often how that's measured in financial terms. I've seen this quite a bit from talking to the financial managers of our client sites. It's very real that they often, and it's mostly because of the scrambling and the heroic efforts associated with every batch. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Now, another question we have for you says your comments on using this framework for a highly manual industry like cell and gene therapy, what type of software can help make human operations more efficient?
Software. All right, I'm gonna think about that. So first of all, I mean, there's a number of when you think about human operations, it's going to depend. There's a lot of systems out there for various purposes, right? A good CMMS, for instance, supports a good asset management program, right? A good asset management system. Good, tracking systems from deviation and all that kind of stuff. But I think rather than name systems, right? It's probably more important that you think in terms of tiers, right? You have a tier of operational software that will manage your business, right? And we all know what some of those systems are. But if you tier down into the system owner world, those system owners should be familiar enough with the systems that are out there, or know what their requirements are for that system, given your process, to choose wisely, right? Set the user requirements very clearly as to what's going to be needed to help their people perform. Now, if you're talking true people performance, right, I think you can look at systems that kind of automate some of the electronic batch records are a wonderful thing if they're executed well and they're accessible in the clean rooms and all that kind of stuff. There are some challenges with that. And then, things like your learning management system, your LIMS for your QC and so forth. I don't know, I'm speaking very vaguely. There's so many systems out there. I guess I'm not quite sure how to answer the question, other than setting the right user requirements and not focusing on best of breed necessarily, but what meets the requirements for my people to do their job, right?
How about any comments on using the framework for the manual industry like cell and gene therapy?
Okay. Well, yeah, this approach absolutely applies to earlier stage um, applications as well. I mean, your system owners, you know, that big periodic table I showed of all the different needs to come together, or even this diagram, maybe not all of them will apply yet in the early stages, and that's fine. Focus on what's going to keep control of the actions that you're taking right now, right? Um, if it's a manual process, focus on the areas of risk and variability control for that manual process, right? And that is a highly human performance piece, right? So your level of experience and transferring the knowledge to the junior people that coming in, or the people new to the process coming in, is going to be the most effective. To me, that's a bigger need, a bigger case for system owners. You probably need fewer of them, but those system owners who know how to perform the actions under the hood, or whatever it is you're doing manually, and teach in a very structured method of training and qualifying the next wave of people to do so, relies on a system owner in a big way. So I think the manual process is actually this roadmap, so to speak, that I showed. Let's see if I can show it again. This roadmap applies even more so for those manual processes, because you can't rely so much on the flow of process through automated means. Just my two thoughts. Your OJT forms, good OJT document, right? We call them OJTs, on the job training worksheets, right? Qual cards, if you will, that qualify someone to perform that task, and they do it, they observe it, they do it under instruction, and when they're ready, they actually perform it and qualify to do it. Manual processes require that significantly, because variability is pretty high in those environments.
Mhm. Very
Hope
good.
I
Thank you
answered
very much.
that.
Um, Another question we have for you asks, what department should system owners report to? You seemed to emphasize manufacturing in your descriptions.
Yeah, I've seen system owners. Well, first of all, you'll have system owners in all your departments if you do this right. I mean, across the board. How many you need in each one is going to vary, right? There tends to be from a plant system side of things, they tend to be either in engineering or operations, but they could be elsewhere as well, right? That's kind of a culture thing as to where they report. The key is they have those characteristics of ownership. They have that expertise. They're given the proper focus and the proper support to do their job as system owners. Who they report to is less important than that they're given those parameters, because realistically, they need to work across the aisles, so to speak, across the work streams, and integrate well with their peers of system owners in other departments anyway. So where their report should still be functional, it's fine, but don't. I know my examples were very centered around manufacturing, engineering. I would caution you not to just think of system owners in that way, because you need a system owner or two in the warehouse. You need a system owner or two in or more in QC or in QA, EHS, etc.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer and for all of the answers. However, we have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar today. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, though, the team at CAI may follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I've also sent you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speaker for all his wonderful time here today, Harry Benson. We hope that you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ryan.